Jesus said, "Come." His disciples followed him to a place called Caesarea Philippi at the foot of Mount Hermon. When he got there, he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" One of them said, "Elijah." Elijah? That's an amazing answer. To Christians, Elijah is a great Old Testament prophet who was faithful to God. That's true. But to a Jew, it's more than that. Elijah is the pattern, the prototype of the rabbi with passion, intense commitment at all costs. He climbed up Mount Carmel and had a contest with the prophets of a pagan cult, climbed back down, oversaw their punishment, climbed back up, prayed passionately, climbed back down, and then ran 20 miles ahead of a chariot. Gave everything he had. That's Elijah. If people were confusing Jesus with Elijah, he must have been a man of intense passion and devotion to the Lord. And his disciples who wanted to be like him would have had the same passion. So how would you translate that commitment, that fire, that total devotion to a Greek culture where leisure and pleasure are the order of the day? Well, they did, in an interesting way. Come, let me show you. We're on the main street of a city that at the time of the disciples was called Aphrodisias. Now, none of the disciples came here that we know of. So I can't tell you any stories about them, but we do know that in the first, second century, there was a community of people who followed Jesus. Disciples, Christians, they were beginning to be called. And they were here. It's an amazing city, really. Take a look at the gate. This is called a tetrapolon. It's a formal gate into the area of Aphrodite. Just look at the beauty. Notice the variety of columns, flutes, spiral flutes, some that are just smooth, the different capitals at the top, the different carvings on the gate itself. And you begin to see that this was not only a wealthy place and a powerful place, but this was also a city of artistry and of art. But we've come here for a different reason. This helps me to appreciate the power of the city, but there's something here that helps us to appreciate how the early disciples could communicate the message that Jesus had entrusted to them or to their teachers. So come with me. This is why we're here, even though none of the disciples were. We need to see how they fit into this part of their world. What's interesting, by the way, is that the Jewish disciples would have had some experience with this because there were two arenas, at least, in Israel. One's in Caesarea. It's huge. It's much bigger than this. Apparently, Herod built it. Part of it's washed away. It's beautiful today with the Mediterranean waves washing up on it. That was huge. And then there's one, if you remember, in Scythopolis, where, much smaller, but where Jesus walked, every time he walked to Jerusalem, he would have walked right by there. There was another there. So they did have some sense of what this part of their world was, although, of course, there are none in Galilee where Jesus taught his disciples. This is a Greek stadium, but it was used at the Roman period when the disciples were in the area, or the disciples of the disciples. It seated about 30 to 40,000, has 24 rows of seats. You can see the entrances for the athletes on both ends. And notice the royal box, the place where the king or the governor or the ruler of the games would sit. Pretty impressive. Picture it in your mind with 40,000 fans screaming for whatever's going on down here. The question I have for me today is this. When Jesus called disciples, they understood that the model for the intensity, the passion, the focus that disciples had, the model was Elijah. But how do you say that to a culture that never heard of Elijah? Well, I'd like to suggest that those early disciples drew their image, their picture, their metaphor for their new disciples who were not Jews out of what they knew about games and athletics. The point of sport was not simply the spectacle for the spectators or to determine who was the best at something. The purpose of sport was to declare God, their gods, to be great and awesome. When the emperor began to be thought of as God, he used the games to say to the world, I'm God, and I'm king of the universe. And the athletes ran, in a sense, to say to the world, we declare that he is Lord and God. They were religious. So in a sense, it's amazing that the gospel writers, the Bible writers, would use that imagery because of the pagan religion. On the other hand, because people knew the games, it communicated powerfully. Let me show you what I mean. Olympic Games, especially those designed to declare to the world that Caesar was God, Domitian, let's say, started with the emperor's entrance. So picture 40,000 fans, and coming through that opening, the emperor. Maybe he's wearing the uniform of a Roman soldier, gleaming in the sun, the red crest back on his head, maybe walking, maybe on a white horse. Or maybe he chose the robe of a Greek god, Zeus, or the Roman Jupiter, that sash across the chest to say, I'm the king, and I'm divine. Watch him come in as 40,000 fans stand to see the Son of God come in. When the emperor came and took his place in the seat of the Lord, the royal box there, decrees would be made. His herald would stand with a copy, and he would address the people gathered from the local communities, and he would say things like, these are the words of the great, divine, supreme, whatever. And then he would tell them what they've done right and what they've done wrong and what they can expect by way of reward and punishment, because after all, he is God. And in the games, the emperor is acclaimed. So imagine all these fans standing as the emperor stands, and the ephebe choir from the local gymnasium gathers around him. And the priests of all the local religious cults stand around him, and they begin to chant his praises as the crowd acknowledged his deity officially. In the Olympic Games, the emperor would stand and open that case that he had and take out a scroll or a document that would be read to declare the games were open. He alone could begin the games that declared his deity. And then, the great event that declared more than any other that Caesar is God, the horse race, chariot race in some cases. Imagine horses into 4 colors. And then the participants parade. Imagine athletes from all over, dressed in white robes, coming in procession by communities, walking around as the crowd chants for their favorite. and assembling before the throne, standing with palm branches in their hands. And they would give their lives to the God of the games and declare that their running was to show the world who is God. And it's in that context, I believe, that Paul draws on the imagery of the games. He knew the games. He knew the point of the games was to declare to the world that Caesar is God. So to Paul, the follower of Jesus is a runner, someone who runs to say to the world, Jesus Christ is Lord and God. Listen, you Galatians, you were running a good race. Who cut you off? Or how about this one? I fought the good fight. That's arena language. I finished the race. That's Olympic language. I've kept the faith. For Paul, the walk with Jesus is an Olympic event. And you and me, we are his athletes. Called to walk after the teacher, the rabbi, the Messiah. Not just because he calls, but to say to the world, watch how we run. To declare to the world that he is king. Or how about this one? You say it after me. Since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders us. And the sin that so easily entangles us. And let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us. We are, in that metaphor, God's Olympians. We got into games because he chose us, not because we earned it. And that's different. But once we're in the games, God desires that the way we live, the way we try to be like our Rabbi Jesus, becomes a flat-out, all-out run. Don't you know, Paul says, in the race, all the runners run, but only one gets the prize. So run like you want to win. Hear me. How do we dare dabble in the Christian walk? How dare we take discipleship as a part-time stroll in the park? How dare we quit? How dare we let up? We are God's Olympians, and our run says to the world that he alone is king. So run! 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 Burns in my soul. That's Elijah. I tried running in high school. I was lousy. They timed me with carbon 14. You know why I was lousy? Because I always held back. I don't want to cross the finish line at the end of my race and have the Lord of my game say, what you got left? I have to tell him that I didn't give it all. I want to end that race by the grace of God and cross that finish line and say, I have nothing left. And that's a radical message in the world of contemporary Christianity, where we kind of crawl through our faith sometimes. God wants Olympians. The passion of Elijah is captured in people who train and run. Now, bless God, you don't have to win. Some of you may be much faster runners than I. God doesn't care. Paul doesn't say run and win. He said run like you want to win. He wants you to give the best you've got. Some will run faster and some will run slower. We just have to run. And if you can capture that, then you'll understand what made the rabbi, teacher, disciple model work. Those people were consumed like Elijah with the fire. But there's another piece. Remember what we quoted? Since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us run. Do you remember where that is in the Bible? Hebrews 12. What's in Hebrews 11? The great heroes of faith. It says they are our witnesses. And I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that those great men and women of the past are our fans. They finished the race already, and they're sitting here watching us in a picture sense. Run. Now, I want you to look out at the stands, and I want you to pick them out. Look, there's Elijah saying, come on, you can do this by the grace of God. I did. He gave me what I needed. Keep running. And there's David, and there's Bathsheba, and there's Abraham and Sarah, and there's Isaac, and there's Ruth, and there's Peter, and Philip. And they're saying, come on, don't quit. What are you going to tell them when you cross the finish line? But you know what else? I don't think it's too much of a stretch in the picture to say that also in the stands are the great heroes. By hero, I mean those who've lived for Jesus with all their might, famous or not, of your life. You see, when I sit here and I think about my walk with Jesus as a run around this course, you know what I see? I see my mom saying, come on, keep running, take another step. And I see my grandparents. Who do you see? A mom who died when you were little. A cousin, a brother, a sister who died way too young. A grandparent you loved with all your heart. Look at them. They're your encouragers. I'm not saying they can see you. I don't think that's the point. I think the point is you're supposed to picture them as your fans. Look at them. Run, they say. Don't quit. It's worth every effort you make. Learn to hear that when the times are tough and other runners seem to be passing you by. Learn to hear them saying, come on. And I don't even think it's too far of a stretch to suggest that someday, if he doesn't come, you and I are going to sit in these stands because we'll have finished the race. We got in the race because by grace, he made us his athletes. But we will have run faithfully. And we become the witnesses for those we leave behind, our children, our grandchildren. You know what? If that's how we're supposed to be thought of, maybe we ought to start now. What if instead of criticizing and cutting down and undermining, we learn to say, come on, I'll run with you. Keep running. I think the biggest barrier to being a disciple, a true disciple, that is someone who is genuinely like Jesus as his grace enables, the biggest barrier in the world you and I live in is that it takes this kind of fire. And that's how Elijah is translated into the world of the Greeks.